Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education. Here at LinkedUp, we bring all of these wonderful educators together who are breaking boundaries in education and bring them to you so that you can hear all of the great things that are happening. Today, we're going to be Jerry and I have been talking a lot about, kids this past year have been doing wonderfully and some have been struggling. So we really need to think about ways to help them, not just academically, but also with respect to social emotional learning as well. So there are lots of learning gaps that need to be addressed, either through summer school or other creative ways. So Jerry and I have some great guests to talk about this today.
Oh, we sure do, Jamie. We have Jeff McCoy from Greenville Public Schools in South Carolina and Darcy Kraus from Lawrence Public Schools in Kansas. Both of these educators are outstanding educators. They're like at the top of my list. I love them both. I got to know them on a professional level, and I've also known them on a personal level. And I so admire the work that both of them do. And so I knew today when we were talking about this topic, I couldn't think of two people that would do a better job of discussing this issue than Darcy and Jeff. So I'm going to have Jeff and Darcy both just introduce yourselves, tell what you do in your district.
All right, so I'm Jeff McCoy. I'm the Associate Superintendent for Academics in Greenville County Schools in Greenville, South Carolina. So I'm responsible for pretty much everything under the academics umbrella.
Yes. And Darcy?
And I am Darcy Kraus, and I am the elementary director for Lawrence Public Schools. So I have the privilege of working with some incredible principals and staff in 14 elementary buildings, and it's a joy.
Yes, and your special project this year has been summer school, right?
Summer school and about 4 different models of learning throughout the year.
Oh, well, yes. Let's just pile that on top of everything else we're all learning, right, as we go. So, I want to start the conversation today with kind of a little controversial issue. We hear in the news and in publications, all kinds of places, people are talking about the learning loss. Now, Jamie and I have a couple of friends that last week, they came unhinged about this. They do not like that term, very upset about it. And we're finding out that some educators do get really upset about the term learning loss during the pandemic. So I'm curious to hear, what are your thoughts about that? And what do you think that term implies?
So I completely understand why people have adopted that term, because this whole year has been filled with loss of one type or another. So I understand that when we shift away from our traditional models in education, people automatically assume that there is a loss. I prefer to say learning continuum. It is what our littles have always been on. And to me, this opportunity, if you will, has allowed us to focus and look more discreetly at the individuals instead of collectively as a group. I understand why it's learning loss, but I try and get my principals to look at the positive side of it. And we're just looking at a different and sometimes broader learning continuum.
I like that term, learning continuum, because really we're all on a learning continuum. It just never really stops. Mm-hmm. Jeff, how about you?
Yeah, so I agree with Darcy. I like that term. For me and for us, we've tried to paint that in the fact that it's learning loss is a little deceptive because the kids didn't really lose information. They never had the information to begin with because they were at home, because they didn't have it. So it's really not learning loss. It's just they were not learning the content that they've been learning in the past at the same speed that they have learned. So to Darcy's point, it is a continuum. We may be a little behind on that. Although, we have data to look at that our kids really are not that far behind based on benchmark data, based on some of the other data that we have. That would be contrary to what a lot of people want to wave the flag and say, this is why e-learning doesn't work and virtual learning doesn't work because our kids lost all this stuff. They really didn't lose learning. We just didn't learn at the same rate. And we've encouraged people to, even locally, when I've had conversations with community members and state members, that maybe we need to put that same passion about learning loss into our conversations around summer, where we know actually learning loss does occur if children are not being read to, if children are not. So that's not a new concept. It's just that now it fits a maybe agenda right now that it didn't fit before. But really take that energy that we're talking about and really look at what can we do for our students who truly experience learning loss, particularly over the summer, every single year, not just during a pandemic.
Oh, great point. And you do have some of the assessments and things to show that the loss is not as bad as what we're hearing in the news?
We do. In Greenville, we do benchmarks 3 times a year. And so when we analyzed our benchmark results, we were anywhere from 4 to 8% off from the year, not the year prior, because we went out in March. So from 2 years prior with that. And certain subgroups certainly did fare worse for us. And we've looked at our kids in poverty. They have certainly fared worse. And so we've really encouraged districts too in our schools. Don't just look overall and say, my kids only lost 2%. Or they just, they're 2% from where they were before. Ours fluctuates 2 to 5% anyway every year. So that's really not a lot for us. But when you dig into the students in poverty, the loss, or if you will, or the difference is much greater. So we're really putting a lot of effort into our students in poverty and putting structures in place and remediation to help them catch up, if you will, or accelerate them back up to their peers.
Yeah, I really think that both of you hit the nail on the head. It's not so much about putting a broad label on this. Instead, we need to look individually at what the kids need, again, academically and with respect to social emotional learning as well. Obviously, summer school is not something new, but a lot of schools are picking it up either in different ways this year or for the first time. Some are doing things other than summer school, some creative ways to get some touch points with kids that maybe they didn't get in the past. So what are your goals? Do you have the same goals as in the past? What is your focus going to be this year? We'll start with you, Darcy.
Thanks. Jamie, I've heard you mention social emotional several times, and I know that's a touchstone to Jerry also. And I think, to your point, one of our focal points this year in summer school, because it's a new adventure for our general education students in Lawrence. And so we are definitely building a brand new system. So we've had the opportunity to explore several different things. We have a focal point on both reading and math. Those are, again, our foundation. But integrating social emotional learning throughout is paramount for the adults and for our little ones as well, starting with those morning meetings. And we found that very effective and something that we were able to do virtually. And we want to bridge that into our in-person learning, which our summer school is all in person. We have taken our priority standards and supporting standards that we have throughout the year and kind of winnowed that down into those super priority standards, if you will. And then we are, because we, quite frankly, are a little concerned about the effect size that summer school traditionally has, which is, I think, like 0.19 or something. Jeff probably knows that a lot better than I do. But, how can we upend those statistics and make it a productive use of time and being good stewards of the financial obligation and commitment that we have to it as well. So looking at those assessments, we are also looking long-term and wanting to measure those students who are availing themselves of the opportunity this summer with that targeted intervention, and then those students who maybe had similar deficits, if you will, and those that didn't, right? That didn't avail themselves of it, and kind of what is that, again, learning loss, if you will, moving forward that Jeff spoke about, because that is historical, right? With schools as our summer learning loss. Right. And I would apply that term there.
Yeah.
Right. It is completely relevant, right? Because kids are often playing and not immersed in any type of education. So that's why we have that term historically. We usually call it summer learning loss, right? So that is something that we always are looking at. And so now you're kind of doubling up and layering on. And then you have some measurements in place. What about the kids who those that you hope to target, and then the ones who don't actually show up? Do you have incentives for coming? How is that going to look?
Yeah, thank you. We do. We have a big incentive program with all of the fun little trinkets that seem to make summer a little bit different than our traditional year. We want it to be engaging, and yet also being very cognizant of the fact that the adults who are going on this adventure with us, if you will, have been stretched very thin this year. And I applaud them for joining us and jumping back into the deep end with our school. Hopefully we're doing 3 hours, 4 days a week for 4 weeks. That's kind of what we found was our happy medium of getting the staffing that we needed, but making it fun for everybody. So, incentives, all about.
I bet. We have a friend who's been on our podcast who did summer school last year, and she said she's just not, because what they had expected as teachers in summer school was way beyond, and they were stretched super thin, and it was really stressful. So I love the fact that you're really paying attention to that and making sure that it's not overwhelming for any stakeholder. That's super important for sure.
And that balance between providing autonomy for the teacher, but yet scripting it enough that they don't feel like they are assuming that burden.
Right, on their own. Right, exactly. How about you, Jeff?
So we always, we have summer school and have had for maybe probably 10 years, I guess. We've had summer school. So this year really for us is just a larger scale. We typically do 800, 900 kids. We have 78,000 kids in our district. So 700, 800 kids usually. We're doing about 10 to 15,000 kids in summer school this year. So, quite a bit of scale. Our state, I'm very much like a lot of states, has a read to succeed requirement. So any student in third grade who has not met one on the state test actually is required to go to summer school, or they have to be retained. Okay. And there's a lot of problems with that. But, we have to do the state law. So we have a little bit of a carrot for those students, but typically we have very few of those students. Typically for a district our size, it's maybe 80 kids. So we'll see what it looks like this year. But ours is, because of that requirement, they do require 96 hours of instruction in the summer. And so for us, for elementary, we are running 8 to 2. It's actually 7:30 to 2 for our Read to Succeed kids in elementary. And I agree with Darcy. We just had to be a little creative and say, look, if you can't teach all 4 weeks, give us 2 weeks, and then you can have, somebody else can take over for you 2 weeks, or teach half a day and let somebody else teach half a day. We've been very flexible. We do probably, Jerry knows me a little bit, I'm probably a little bit more control freak than a lot of people are. Our summer program has been very successful in reading in the past. All of our kids, about anywhere from 88 to 94% of our kids make gains in reading over the summer who are in our program. So because of the success of that, we do have a little bit more scripted program that they follow, which quite frankly, our teachers are okay with, because they don't want to spend any more time in summer planning than they have to. Sure. So it works for us. And we do have success with it. Our middle and high school, they only go about 3 hours, 4 hours during the day. And our high school really focuses on content and credit recovery. So that's really lab and getting help. So, we hope the 10 to 12,000, we've identified the kids that we feel have the most needs and didn't make as much progress as we wanted to this year for whatever reason. And we are all face-to-face this summer as well. We decided to offer only virtual for our high school kids who have to work, but still need to recover credit.
Great. One more question. Do either of you, or have either of you had anything in place throughout this past spring to prepare, maybe get ahead of it before the summer? Any types of programs in place?
Well, we did, yeah. So back in December, I added elementary interventionists, additional elementary interventionists to every elementary school. We added at high school level, we added additional aids to help in content and credit recovery, as well as we paid teachers, if they were willing to do it, we paid teachers on their planning periods to work and tutor kids, both virtual and face-to-face, for those kids who we felt like needed a little bit more assistance. And we also paid for before and after school tutoring, paid teachers to do before and after school tutoring.
Jeff, I want to back up just a minute because I know people listening will say, what do you attribute your summer school success in reading to? Because people want to know the secret sauce.
I don't know if it's a secret sauce as much as it is a very intentional focus on reading. And really applying those strategies. We're a balanced literacy district, Fountas and Pinnell, LLI for intervention. Those teachers who teach for us in summer school go to an additional 2 full days of training on balanced literacy and LLI. And even our teachers coming out of that, a lot of them say, I've been doing this for 10 years, and this is, I know much more about this training now than I ever did about balanced literacy before, even though we do training all the time. Yes. But it's just a very intense, with a lot of breaks, a lot of fun stuff, like Darcy said, kind of mixed into it. But even our fun stuff like readers theater and the plays, all of that incorporates reading. And we've also done a lot with our parents with giving books at home and sharing that research with parents about the gap, the 1,000,000-word gap for parents who read to their children versus parents who don't. And so we have a whole resource site for parents. So we just say, here's some easy things you can do with your kids around reading that can really help make a huge difference in their reading proficiency levels.
So true. Such great strides when kids just have that connection with family at home and reading. I mean, there's such a big difference there. And it's such a simple thing to do. And it's such a nice way to connect with your children. So the trick is finding the time. Yep. But once they do that, then it's such a joyful thing. I miss those days when my kids were little. It was fantastic for sure.
Well, I want to move forward just a little bit because I believe that people have really romanticized learning in the brick and mortar pre-pandemic. It was like it was this beautiful world and everything was perfect, but it wasn't. And I know that the learning gaps existed, and it just seems like they were really brought into the spotlight with COVID. So summer school's one step. But can you speak to some of the measures that you're going to take after summer school? Moving forward, how are you going to bridge these gaps, these equity gaps?
Well, I can start us off.
Good.
So one of the things that we had the opportunity to do as through one of our learning models and one of our last ones was play a little bit with our Wednesday schedule. And we had some additional time. We had some additional folks due to myriad of variables, I guess I should say. But I challenged the principals to just go rogue on intervention, right? And try things that they always wanted to try, but never could because we were lockstep in the traditional modality, right? And I said, guys, totally up to you, whatever you want to do. I took what they needed as resources, kind of filtered that into their various sites as I was able, but most of it, and I will give all due credit to them. I just came from a school prior to this, and the principal was elated because we were seeing 94% of her kids that were involved in that targeted intervention had made gains in those targeted skills. And she was just over the moon, right? And so I think to your point about what we're going to do moving forward, my challenge was to define basically an action research project during the spring semester, learn what it was going to need, what supports they needed so that we could fall forward into fall, if you will, and implement that on a grander scale with more supports that we weren't, building while we were flying, so to speak. And so I would say that has been kind of one of those little nuggets of knowledge that we've pulled from this experience, is that instead of broadly intervening with our kids, to really hone in on those deficits and target just those. And we're finding that it doesn't take a great deal of time for most of our kids, especially with those tier 2 interventions, and especially if they are truly double dipped and the classroom teacher and the intervention period is, they are focused on the same skill set. So that, I think, has been our fun little thing that we've started, and I have great hopes for it in fall 2021.
That's great to hear. Did many of the principals experience success with some of the programs they tried?
Yes, especially those that embraced the challenge and kind of went outside the box. I know quite a few of them used, I think, Win Time, that book, to look at things, what they need, and the systems. And I think just the systems, they had a moment in time to take a breath and create the paperwork and the communication flow that allowed the programs and the experiment, if you will, to succeed.
That's great. Encouraging. Yes. How about you, Jeff?
So yeah, we're continuing some of the same things that we did kind of pre-COVID, left off, a little bit more aggressive. We have been working on, I know this will sound a little weird, but we have been working on reducing our interventionists because we really want to, our philosophy has always been, you have to have strong core instruction. And if we keep just adding interventionists, you're just like the boy plugging the holes in the dam. You'll constantly do that until the end of time. So because of the kids and where they are, we know we have some catching up to do. We are adding additional interventionists to every school this year to help kind of mitigate some of the issues we had this year. But we are putting a renewed focus, though, on we have the reports by every classroom as far as what % of the kids are in intervention. And our rule has always been, if 20% or more of your kids in your school are in intervention, then you have a core instruction problem. And so my team comes in with a focused school model, a school transformation model. We work beside the principal. This is not an oversight. This is working beside the principal on how do we help you lessen the kids that need intervention because your core instruction is so strong. And so that we're going to be doing a renewed emphasis on that this year. We'll give them the interventionists for the temporary issues we have, but then really doubling down our efforts, and particularly our Title I schools. And where sometimes we have the newer teachers and teachers who maybe, are not as experienced, who need some help. And we'll go alongside them and do coaching cycles and just really emphasize increasing that core instruction efficacy in the classroom, which will hopefully the following year result in us being able to remove those interventionists in the schools because they don't have nearly as many kids that need it.
Right. So just trying to catch up right now. Right. And then, yes, that sounds great. Yes. Jamie, I'm going to throw it back over to you.
So, looking forward and thinking about what took place during the pandemic. What are those 3 A's that you are going to be addressing? What are you going to adopt moving forward? What are you going to adjust? And what are you going to just abandon? Darcy?
Oh, okay. I think adopt, I'm going to double down on what Jeff said. And we are talking more and more about augmenting the skill set of our classroom teachers and understanding that intervention begins in the classroom, right? It's not a pull out thing. And I also think that we have learned out of necessity the benefits of more flexibility in general. So, for example, parent-teacher conferences, right? That partnership, we're always trying to strive for greater engagement between school and home. And always before I know our relationship goals, it was like I had 98% of my parents come to parent-teacher conferences. But this year, where we had to have them virtually, our participation rate was through the roof. And instead of it being a default to meet with them virtually, why not make that a parent choice, right? Absolutely. So that provides opportunities to sometimes those more marginalized subsets that we have that traditionally may not want to walk into a brick and mortar building. And so really deploying those choices and those options, not only for our students, but for the adults as well. So that's the intervention hard hit in the classroom, and then the experimenting with the flexibility for communication and even site councils, right? Why are we just restricted to 8 people sitting around a conference table when we can have a forum such as this and include more folks and more voices? Adjust, I would say, we about 2 years ago spent an inordinate amount of time building our multi-tiered systems of support. We call it CI3T, GEI, acronym city, right?
Oh, sure.
But understanding that those systems are going to have to be well-oiled moving into next year, and spending this summer at kind of resetting and reigniting what that looks like. And so when we come back in the fall and we anticipate whether it's summer learning loss or just a broader continuum of learning, that our systems are not overwhelmed by the need. And what are we going to do to address that? So we're forward thinking instead of being reactive.
Yeah.
And abandon, oh golly. I think probably abandoning the mindset that we have to do school the way we've always done school, and that you don't need to be a formal redesigned school, which we have a system for that in Kansas, but that anybody can redesign, and you can do it in just the smallest of ways, and it can be so very impactful. So.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, we absolutely reimagined education. I mean, there were things that we would always say, no, never, we could never do that. That'll never work. That'll never work. And instead, we were forced to really just say, we have to do this. And then looking back, well, that was actually great. Why don't we do it from now on? So it's really been an interesting year for sure to see how all of these different out of the box concepts have played out. How about you, Jeff?
So I kind of along the same lines, a little bit of Darcy. Some of the adopt, I think we heard the same thing, that our the relationships with our kids in virtual with our teachers was, in many cases, the parents said they felt was stronger than when it was in the brick and mortar classroom, because you had one-on-one time, you had more time to engage with kids sometimes because of the flexibility of the environment. And we definitely are not going back to requiring parents to come in for IEP meetings. We will do it virtually on your lunch hour while you're sitting at your desk or wherever it happens to be. And I think we just learned that like Darcy, we had higher participation rates in every kind of conferences we did, from IEP meetings to IGP meetings, individual graduation plan meetings, with our parents, because they could take 30 minutes off their lunch break and do it versus having to take a half day of work. And for a lot of parents, I think our teachers and our administrators realize there's an equity gap for us who may be professionals, who it's not a big deal to leave work for a half hour to go for a half a day to go do a conference. For our parents who their income relies on the hours they work, that's a huge issue. And so I think it was just an eye-opening experience for our teachers. Many of them in virtual who said, I know you've always told us about GRACE and SEL, particularly because we don't know what our kids are going through. Well, now they know what their kids are going through because they saw it firsthand in the home. And it changed, I think, a lot of our teachers' lives who really realized the SEL importance sunk into them to say, now I understand why our kids come to school and act the way they do sometimes, because I've had a firsthand glimpse into their house. So I think just hopefully those teachers adopting those experiences they've seen, and the flexibility of utilizing technology to bridge the equity gap, I think is huge for our parents. I think the adjustment, for us, is just adjusting the instructional practices. A lot of teachers we were a very technology forward district. We've had devices for every child for about 7 years. But we had those adopters, those late adopters, shall we say, still. And I think this definitely forced them to adopt technology. And many of them had more success with their kids with the technology strategies they were using. They were instructional strategies enhanced by technology that they were using. And so a lot of our teachers, I think, were adjusting now those kind of instructional strategies to better meet the needs of really our 21st century children.
I want to jump in there for just a second.
Yeah.
ClassLink did a big study on all of the analytics that we collect, and we found that even the in-person schools that are all in person now, their technology use is up 65%, which is really high, you know? And so I don't think that modality is going to go away.
No, and I agree. And I think that's part of too, when we talk about what to abandon, I'm hoping we abandon the mindset that virtual learning is subpar to brick and mortar teaching. Our kids really pushed us. We meet with our seniors every month. Not all of them, obviously, a representative group, 4 from each school. But it's about, 60, 80 seniors in a room with our superintendent and the senior leadership staff. And our kids are really now pushing us, I think, too, to say, why can't we attend school 3 days a week instead of 2 days a week? Why can't we learn virtually if we want to learn virtually? Again, I want to talk the equity gap. We closed that in some cases because kids who needed to work or drop out of school, because that used to be the option, you either worked or you dropped out of school. Now all of a sudden had an option where, hey, you can actually work during the day and you can do your schoolwork at night. And so for many of our kids, not all, but for many of our kids, that was successful for them. If they were motivated, they could work and support their family because they had to economically, but they could also earn a high school diploma while they're doing it. So those things we've got written down somewhere. We've been very intentional. I think Susan Enfield, a good friend of mine from Highline Public, superintendent, basically has said multiple times, we have got to keep in mind, write down what we don't want to abandon and lose, because we will quickly get back into the throw of what we did and we'll lose it.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it is almost too easy to just go back to the way things were, right? We really do need to spend this time of reflection to sort out what we want to keep. So we appreciate the two of you sharing that. Hey, Jerry, you want to do a lightning round?
Oh, let's do. I have just 3 questions for you. So the rules are 30 seconds or less. You answer the question. We'll have Darcy go first. So just 3 questions. The first one is, what do you know now that you wish you knew before the pandemic? It could be personal or professional.
I think I underestimated the impact that just culture had on the adults that were teaching our children. I've always been one that tries to give grace, but understanding that needed to be in a magnanimous dose. And I wish I would have recognized that earlier on to be more preemptive.
That's a great one. Jeff?
So for me, I would just, the pandemic's taught us, I think, and me, anything is that adults also have a lot of lack of coping mechanisms. And kind of to Darcy's point, just that grace, and also understanding that our adults don't have a lot of the SEL skills that we expect them to teach our own children. And so really for us, it really drove home the need that we have got to do more PD and professional learning around self-care and their own coping mechanism strategies for our own teachers and adults.
Great points. So the second question is, what's something that you've learned in your school district that you could share with another school district that could help them? It could be a practice, an idea, anything.
Oh, goodness. I don't know that it necessarily has a name. I think we've learned the importance. We've heard personalized learning. That was a buzzword there for a while. But honing in on the individual instead of the collective, instead of grouping them, but really, again, with the technology, we have the capacity to hone in on individual needs, and we see greater growth due to that. So how do you scale that up? With a classroom of 30.
Right.
Yeah, very similar. Darcy stole mine to a degree. So I'll just say I think in line with that, how do you utilize technology and really leverage technology to do what Darcy just said? Our teachers now have a better idea of how to individualize and personalize learning, where they struggled with it before COVID. But because they were forced in an environment of technology environment, all of a sudden it was much easier in that environment. So now we're blending to say, okay, how do you take that still now and do that in the classroom to personalize and individualize learning?
Yeah, it's so true because, think, for example, like the flipped classroom model, a lot of teachers just could not conceptualize that and really, just kind of weren't taking it on. But then all of a sudden during the pandemic, it becomes the norm almost. And now they get it. And now they really see the importance of that formative data and how you can really drive the individual needs of the students from there. So that's definitely something I think is going to be a big takeaway.
And for our last question, so you're both education leaders, and for people that are thinking about becoming an education leader, they're going to face things like this, different things in the future. What advice would you give someone that wants to be an education leader?
That makes me feel old. But I will say mentoring is my heart's passion right now. So I guess I would say that regardless of the year, there are going to be challenges. And it's your approach to how you choose to embrace them, keeping centralized your moral compass, your educational compass, and making your decisions filtered down through that. But understanding that resilience is going to be your best friend, and people watch what you do during these times, and it can make or break your credibility as an educational leader.
That's great advice. Jeff?
Yeah, for me, I guess one of the biggest lessons I learned this year because of COVID is just self-care for myself. That's not something any of us are good at this level. Because the work never ends. And so, I was able to get by with that for the first 21 years of my career. And this year with the constant stress and the constant was just crushing. And so, I really had to step back and learn how to self-care, those strategies. And I can't remember the quote, Emily something, but talked about, you have to take care of yourself so you can give of your best to others. And if you're worn down, then you're not giving your best to others. So that, and just so what Darcy said, look for future leaders in times of crisis. We're all, many of us are towards the end of our career. And so looking at during times of crisis, who really shines during those times of crisis, and start looking for those leaders, even during a crisis time. Who is it that are the future leaders of your district based on how they react during those crises?
Absolutely.
Oh, those are both great nuggets of advice. Thank you both. Well, I can't thank you both enough for, you dropped so many great nuggets of information to us, and it was enjoyable to hear what both districts are doing. So many things are alike, so many ideas are alike, and we appreciate you being on the show today and sharing your expertise. And so for our audience, we hope that you'll do us a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we have lots of great episodes out there. We even learned that we have some districts that are using the podcast for professional development points. So we're excited about that. So thank you both for being on the show today, and great luck as you finish out this school year.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.